Hi everyone, this is Hana, and welcome back to my island. Recently, Starbucks Korea launched a Tank Day promo on May 18th. It caused a massive public backlash in Korea. I already made a short video about it, but a 3-minute video isn't enough. We need a deeper conversation about Korea's modern history over the past 80 years. Also, the hate culture from Neo-Fascism isn't just in Korea. It's happening all over the world. So I think we have a lot to talk and think about together. Food for thought. Well then, shall we begin? Starbucks Korea is not directly run by the US headquarters. A massive Korean conglomerate known as Chaebol, Shinsegae Group partners with Starbucks, and they run it independently in Korea. The promo their marketing team launched on May 18th shows something terrible. It shows how scattered acts of malice connect to form one massive wave of violence. In Korean Neo-Fascist communities like Ilbe and FM Korea, hit the desk is the phrase mocking the torture and death of the activist Park Jong-chul. And tank reminds of us the military rebellion by Chun Do-hwan's new military group. All these things appeared exactly on May 18th. This day symbolizes a tragedy of state violence. What is even more tragic? The promo started at 10 a.m. They set the time on purpose. That was the exact time in 1980s when martial law troops were first ordered to charge on innocent students. It was also the exact time the 46th anniversary ceremony for the May 18th democratization movement was happening in 2026. Right when the memorial was taking place, the Tank Day promo blatantly mocked these historical wounds. In May 1980, the state, which should protect its people, turned into an attacker. It massacred its own citizens in Gwangju. It was the most brutal act of betrayal. Using victims of state violence as a joke for corporate marketing is a crime. It should be treated more seriously than any foreign invasion. It can never be forgiven. The mocking language of extremist groups slipped right through the corporate approval process, and it infiltrated citizens' daily lives. Korean citizens didn't just sit back and watch. An immediate boycott of Starbucks Korea caused the sales to drop by millions of dollars. Then, a few days later, Shinsegae Group Chairman Chung Yong-jin made a public apology. But this actually poured fuel on the fire. It was called an apology, but there was no real explanation or reflection inside. He called this massive historical insert inappropriate marketing by Starbucks Korea. He downplayed it as a basic PR mistake. He said, whatever the reason, I feel deeply responsible. But he avoided the root cause, his own history of neo-fascist words and actions. For a long time, Chung Yong-jin, he has been shouting, destroy communism on his own social media. He aligned himself with domestic neo-fascist groups. The top decision maker of the company used hate and exclusion for power. Meanwhile, his company's team launched a promo mocking victims of state violence. This was not an accidental slip. It was a structural certainty. On top of that, in his apology, Chung Yong-jin said, I won't make any excuses. But then he asked people to understand why his apology was late. He showed deep arrogance from a position of power. Finally, he asked people to look warmly at the hardworking frontline employees. He used the innocent third parties as human shields. This is a typical divide and conquer strategy. It turns a boycott, which is a justified moral anger of citizens, into an act of bullying the weak. He even talked about May 18th and Park Jong-chul's death, saying people may have different thoughts. He dragged historical truth down into a matter of personal opinion. The very person responsible for the harm dared to declare forgiveness and harmony. What an absolute joke. Korean citizens recently went through an unprecedented emergency martial law crisis and brought it down. Through this, our ability to spot a true apology got much sharper. But Chung Yong-jin totally failed to read the room, the citizens, and the consumers' minds. This will probably go down in world history or a marketing book. It shows the disaster that happens when a corrupt neo-fascist cartel brings its isolated worldview into corporate management. To make things worse, Starbucks Korea tried to cover it up. They claimed the marketing team employees refused to hand over their phones. They tried to close the case with an internal investigation using low-level employees as a scapegoat to protect themselves. They claimed they had no bad intentions, but they hid the exact evidence that could prove it. Ironically, this proves exactly why forced investigation by public authorities and digital forensics are necessary. Currently, civic groups have filed a complaint against Shinsegae Chairman Chung Yong-jin and the staff. They filed it for defaming and insulting May 18th. The police are investigating. Austrian linguist Ruth Wodak analyzed this. The neo-fascist strategy follows a pattern: provocation, denial, playing the victim, displacement, and mainstreaming. They throw a provocative message with a calculated vagueness. When criticized, they deny the intention. If they get sanctioned, they cry totalitarianism or fascism. They pretend to be opposed victims. And here's the thing. They turn the issue into a matter of freedom of speech to make a society tolerate their provocations. Chairman Chung and Starbucks Korea follow this exact sneaky playbook. Korean society is going through these dangerous steps in a compressed way right now. Just like right after the December 3rd martial law incident, neo-fascist groups quickly gathered and fought back. Starbucks Korea might be cornered, but anti-democratic political groups are still attacking fiercely. The distorted meme that May 18th was a riot has never been spread this widely since democratization in 1987. Texts that people didn't dare to speak before are now proudly walking around our society's public squares, protected by the main opposition party and neo-fascist politicians. This is an unbelievable reality. Furthermore, hate groups are spreading massive amounts of fake facts, malicious images, and manipulated videos. Fake news articles claim the May 18th democratization movement took orders from North Korea. Manipulated videos show citizens driving tanks into martial law troops. There are even AI-generated video of Chun Do-wan drinking Starbucks coffee and calling May 18th a riot. Terrible visuals are covering the internet. Videos showing chocolate-colored blood splashing from a tank with a Starbucks logo firing at the National Assembly. Images of tanks trampling Chinese and North Korean people while flying the Korean and US flags. This is the reality we are in right now. In Korea, a country divided for almost a century, neo-fascism became a subculture. And our society ignored and neglected it for a very long time. Now, the bill for all this hate has arrived at our door, with interest attached. The soil that allows companies to openly display hate was built by long-term social neglect. People maintained a rigid artificial neutrality. They ignored the hate speech of extremist groups, calling it just a joke by a few or freedom of speech. The price of ignoring violence eventually broke through the corporate approval line. In the Divine Comedy, Dante described those who could not go to heaven or hell and were despised. There were those who stood by and chose neither good nor evil. Human rights activist Desmond Tutu also said that staying neutral in an unjust situation is like taking the side of the oppressor. In the end, rigid neutrality and silence in the face of hate is not an objective attitude. It is the most active teamwork that lets violence slip into daily life. In Korean society, this cartel of isolation and silence was designed by the state over a long time. I also lived through the days of strong American influence. Economic growth and anti-communist ideology were taught as the absolute good. I remember in elementary schools, there were statues of a boy who was killed for shouting, "I hate the Communist Party." We had to watch anti-communist movies in groups. Every year, we draw anti-communist posters and internalize the demonization of North Korea. Spy reporting numbers were written largely on buses and subways everywhere. We uncritically accepted the prejudice fed by mass media that North Korea is evil. And in the countless gangster movies and dramas released in the 2000s, the sneaky and cruel criminals all spoke with a Jeolla province dialect because Gwangju is located in Jeolla province. It was almost like a rule. Later, working as a culture magazine editor, I met film industry insiders and confirmed it. This was never an accidental choice by the entertainment media. This was a very intentional cultural branding. They wanted to politically and socially isolate the Honam region, which was the core of Korea's democratization struggles, including the May 18th Gwangju democratization movement. They wanted to frame them as a rebellious group. By demonizing the language of the Jeolla region as the language of criminals and scammers on screen, the state power naturally and firmly planted hate and discrimination against the specific region into the public's unconscious mind. The state carefully planted the seeds of ideological division and hate deep into citizens' daily lives. It was only after traveling abroad and facing the unfiltered reality of Western culture that I deeply realized something. The binary logic of the Cold War forced on us by the government and the system was a prison we locked ourselves in. In particular, extreme political polarization and ideological wars come largely from internal division. But they are also heavily rooted in the geopolitical, psychological warfare between the US, China, and Russia, all around the Korea Peninsula. Historical circumstances suggesting the US stood by or intervened behind the scenes during the armed suppression of the May 18th Gwangju democratization movement are not groundless rumors. Declassified US government documents like the Cherokee Files, exposed by journalist Tim Shorrock, prove it. They show the Carter administration knew about and proved the movement of Chun Doo-hwan's special forces in advance. They practically allowed the 20th Division troops to re-enter Gwangju in May 1980. Behind the malicious rhetoric framing its own citizens as rioters taking order from North Korea lay the cold interest of a massive superpower. They looked the other way while a military dictatorship massacred its own people, all under the excuse of keeping the anti-communist front on the Korean Peninsula. This thought control continued. During the conservative Lee Myung-bak administration from 2008, the National Intelligence Service led a cyber-psychological war against its own people. State agencies used the taxpayers' money to create cheap humor and fake images, polluting the minds of the younger generation. This was not a conspiracy theory. It's not like a movie. It was revealed as a substantial truth confirmed by the judiciary. The Lee Myung-bak administration's intelligence service actually ran civilian command brigades like the Alpha Team. They systematically manipulated public opinion. They photoshopped images of former President Roh Moo-hyun, who was loved by the nation, with animals to mock him. They poorly photoshopped and spread pictures of cultural artists who criticized the government. They committed low-level character assassination that was hard to believe a state agency would do. According to the analysis of psychological warfare back then, low-quality, clumsy internet memes dig into the public's unconscious much easier. In the end, due to the fake news they manipulated, former President Roh Moo-hyun took his own life to protect his honor. This left deep scars and traumas in the hearts of Korean citizens. Korean people so loved him. So much. Guilt that we couldn't protect him. And helplessness that evil is persistent, detailed, and unstoppable, but we could do nothing. Won Se-hun, the former intelligence chief under the Lee Myung-bak administration, used the cyber psychological warfare meant for enemy countries during a war on his own citizens. He was confirmed to serve 4 years in prison by the Supreme Court for interfering in the presidential election and politics. Former Defense Minister Kim Gwangju, who ordered the military cyber command to manipulate public opinion, and other military officials were also convicted one after another. Throughout the Lee Myung-bak and Park Geun-hye administration, agencies responsible for national security aimed their guns at the people to manipulate public opinion. They supplied massive ideological fuel to the extremist community called Ilbe. They went even further and created a cultural blacklist of about 10,000 people. Like all the directors, Korean directors, Bong Joon-ho, Park Chan-wook, you name it. Everyone on the list. They blocked the critical intellectuals and artists from getting state support and shut their mouth. During the Seoul ferry disaster, they mobilized the government-sponsored group and Neo-Fascist communities. They framed the grieving families as compensation hunters in a malicious public opinion war. Ilbe's binge-eating struggle, where they order pizza and chicken and mock the grieving families on a hunger strike, was also an outcome encouraged by these administrations from behind. They gave them a fake justification called patriotism. And they pulled the cockroaches out of the shadows into the light. That was around the time I decided I had to leave Korea. The most tragic fact is that these terrible state crimes did not pay the right price. The Yoon Suk-yeol administration in 2022 specially pardoned Kim Tae-hyuk. He was convicted for leaking the military cyber command's political involvement and public opinion manipulation during the Lee Myung-bak administration. They immediately appointed him as the first deputy director of the National Security Office. Former Defense Minister Kim Gwang-jin, who ordered the manipulation of public opinion, was also pardoned and reinstated. He was appointed as the vice chair of the Presidential Defense Innovation Committee. We clearly witnessed an unbelievable cartel of impunity. Criminals who privatized state power, waged psychological warfare against the people, and trampled on democracy received perfect pardons under the government's protection. And they made a glamorous return to the core of power. Ultimately, all that karma led to Yoon Suk-yeol's illegal declaration of emergency martial law on December 3rd, 2024. It meant to be happened. And the Korean citizens, we were the ones who paid a massive social and economic price for it. The old destroy communism frame, systematically cultivated by the state for a long time, survived. It is even blocking the path to finding survival alternatives for the upcoming AI era. Global mainstream academics are seriously discussing post-capitalist solutions for the end-of-labor era. Things like universal basic income, robot taxes, shorter working hours, and public control production methods. But in Korea, the old brand of communism gets slapped on them, making even a debate impossible. This is the miserable result of hate, stopping critical thinking and drying up the imagination for the future. In Korean modern history, failing to clear out pro-Japanese collaborators, the long life of Massacre Jeondu-hwan, political pardons for the powerful, and ignoring the anti-social community Ilbe. Altogether, these historical stains look like independent events. but they are actually a sticky lineage of unpunished crimes. Sins not paid for on time gather interest and return to the whole society as a massive bill. The young teenagers who binged on pizza in front of the Seoul family's hunger strike are now adults in their 30s, maybe 40s. They have entered the core of our workforce and consumer market, working at places like Lotte Giants, Mushinsa, and Starbucks Korea. We constantly see the terrible results leaking into the office marketing of these companies. Mushinsa promoted drying socks with a phrase mocking the torture and death of activist Park Jong-chul in their ad. Many corporate marketing companies, including the Lotte Giants, official YouTube channel used Ilbe's specific slang in their subtitles and images to demean a former President Roh Moo-hyun or put down specific regions. These people cleverly hid their true colors during job interviews. Once they reached the practical positions, they wrapped the mocking culture of the shadows in marketing paper. And they scattered it indiscriminately into the public's daily lives. While this extremist group infiltrated corporate approval lines and grew into generational culture, the state was completely incompetent. The Korea Communications Standards Commission rejected citizens' permissions to shut down Ilbe every single time. They used a mechanical, outdated rule that more than 70% all posts must be illegal info to shut down a site as an excuse. All they did was play a lukewarm game of whack-a-mole, deleting a few individual hate posts and temporarily blocking access. Meanwhile, the massive political parties just calculated votes. They were pushed back by the conservative group's first logic of suppressing freedom of speech. They have neglected to enact a comprehensive anti-discrimination law and a hate speech punishment law for 20 years. The complete lack of regulation became the strongest free pass for hate groups. In the Korean webtoon Owl, when asked why a French company strictly violates labor law only in Korea, the main character Gu Go-shin answered, because they can do that here. Johnny Somali, an American YouTuber who kissed the Statue of Peace and committed deepfake crimes, and the extremist groups promoting hate internally. Both are correctly so through the loose moral defense line of Korean society. In fact, Johnny Somali stated in court that he chose Korea as his easiest target. He carefully calculated the weak points of the judicial system. He knew that legal punishment for insult or hate crimes are lighter in Korea compared to other countries like China, and immediate physical control by public authority is difficult. Taking advantage of lack of proper punitive damages system, they intentionally step on the most painful historical symbols and turn anger into financial profit. In a structure where the law's judgment is slow and ends with a slap on the wrist, they roam freely and bully the weak. The experience of facing no real consequences gave them endless freedom to cause harm. The legislature left hate as a political resource. The administration hid behind outdated rules. The corporate system, driven purely by profit, gave up even minimum ethical control. The compounding cost of this impunity is now brutally trampling on the common sense of our society. While the state cultivated hate and capital distributed it, the political world, which should have been a strong breakwater, neglected its duty. It has been 20 years since the Human Rights Commission recommended its enactment in 2006. Among OECD member countries, Korea and Japan are the only two without a comprehensive anti-discrimination law. The Democratic Party, the current massive ruling party, has delayed the enactment of the anti-discrimination law for 20 years. It is cowardice, bowing to conservative protests and rallies of 100,000 people and prioritizing vote counts. Even in this 22nd National Assembly, Representative Son-seol of the Justice Party barely filled the quorum for proposing the bill by passing around handwritten letters. And opposition protesters are held openly in front of the church, attended by current Prime Minister Kim Min-seok. Germany enacted a hate speech punishment law holding social media platform operators strictly responsible for managing illegal content. They may not have completely controlled algorithmic recommendation, the root cause of hate amplification. But they proved for the first time in history that the state can legally intervene and control the content management of giant big tech companies. In comparison, the reality that Korea lacks a hate speech punishment law and a platform responsibility law clearly shows the incompetence and dereliction of duty of the mainstream political world. The price of leaving the legal net so loose that hate is mistaken for a right is absolutely devastating. After the December 3rd emergency martial law incident, the Neo-Fascist groups broke into the Seoul Western District Court without a shred of remorse. They threatened arson and murder. It evolved into uncontrollable physical terror. While politics consume the names of victims and painful history only as emotional resources for elections, the specific victims with names and faces had to endure the mocking of the attackers every year, shedding tears of blood. Of course, legal regulations alone cannot solve all problems. Diverse social response must happen together. Today's neo-fascist ecosystem is highly decentralized. It is cleverly mixed with everyday complex functions like leisure or entertainment. Their tactics are deliberately coded. As regulations become more precise, their language and tactics grow more encrypted and harder to decode. Therefore, explicit threats to the constitutional order must be blocked with the strict power of law and public authority. But for the many acts of hate moving secretly in the gray area between legal and illegal, we must seek a much more multidimensional and flexible response methods. This normalization of extremism is not unique to Korea. According to the Global Terrorism Index 2026 report, youth radicalization is currently the most serious threat facing the world. They dive deep into the online ecosystem, mainly focusing on young men. They are breeding a highly connected new form of violence called nihilistic violent extremism. Social media has become a dedicated highway for extremist groups. They bypass the traditional safety nets of parents, teachers, and communities. And they directly infiltrated vulnerable teenagers and young adults in their 20s. In Spain, support for the Franco dictatorship, which had been steadily dropping since 1986, recently bounced back for the first time in history. Young men in Spain are uncritically exposed to content glorifying dictatorship spreading on social media. They are quickly learning toward past neo-fascism ideology. The algorithm of giant big tech companies use the economic anxiety young people feel amid the inequality of neoliberalism as fuel. They turn it into hate and generate massive profits. To young people who lost the chance to analyze structural contradictions, the algorithm throws immigrants, minorities, or specific regions or genders as easy scapegoats. The British series Adolescence on Netflix sharply highlighted the minds of vulnerable boys fascinated by violent power structures, willing to stand with the strong. This is how young people trapped in algorithms are guided to choose violent ways to confirm a shallow sense of belongings and superiority by trampling on those weaker than them instead of digging into the problems of the massive system. As noted in the case of Chung Yong-jin and Starbucks Korea, neo-fascism in the world today appears in two forms. Unlike the old fascism, which clearly shows extreme language and violence, neo-fascism slowly eats away at the values and worldview of society on the border of extreme and normal, illegal and legal. It is no coincidence that they use memes and humor to bring radical ideas into mainstream culture. As already mentioned, the core of their action is the politics of ambiguity. They use the strategy of weaponizing irony, using the gap between surface meaning and actual function to voice forbidding messages. The fabricated numbers, mocking phrases, and specific finger shapes we saw in the Starbucks Korea incident might look ordinary on the outside. But inside the neo-fascist ecosystem, the meaning is clearly shared. It's the so-called dog whistle technique. They create a way out to avoid punishment and deny their intentions. At the same time, they increase public access, making hate discourse consumed as entertainment. It is a meticulous strategy precisely mirroring how Ilbe expanded its power by borrowing the form of familiar memes. If someone points out the violence of hate and raises an issue, they say, "Oh, it's just a meme." Or, "Why are you taking a joke so seriously?" A strong defense shield that easily neutralizes criticism is perfectly designed from the beginning. This Cowardice strategy is just as dangerous as explicit violence. The most tragic point shown by the Starbucks Korea Tank Day incident lies right in taboo breaking. Because even though it is an antisocial behavior, it can function as a starting point to enter mainstream society. Now, this is all over the news and all over the world. They break down the boundaries of what is acceptable and unacceptable, what is imaginable and unimaginable, what can be said and what dare not be said. Reconstructing the public's cognitive map. People who were shocked at first time gradually become numb and eventually get swayed. If we dress hate up as satire and package fascism as a joke, the established society helplessly misses the timing for serious response and regulation. We cannot stop this massive regression just with site blocking or legal punishment. We absolutely need something to replace the void that the extremist worldview fills for young people. A sense of belonging, identity, the flat black and white logic of friend and foe, and the twisted self-esteem given by identifying with the strong. The fundamental alternative to fill the empty space must ultimately start from education. Korean society strictly banned the word politics in classrooms for a very long time. Under the excuse of protecting children, they completely blocked all forms of political activities like mock voting or political debates. They suppressed the children's independent political language and space for participation. And they completely neglected and ignored that empty space, letting the language of Ilbe take it over. After doing all that, others now say they are worried about the youth turning to neo-fascism and that we must rush to fix it. This perception is highly deceitful and contradictory. Young people who failed to build immunity as democratic citizens were thrown defenseless onto the front lines of social media, ruled by the hate business as soon as they got the right to vote. Even now, we must open the classroom doors and teach children politics. We must make debate an everyday thing. We need a systematic structure where teachers ask questions students can relate to and help them reflect on their own. We don't need to uncritically trust the case of Germany, which signed the Boycotts consensus in 1976 and agreed on political debates in the classroom as the perfect answer. Even Germany itself is currently facing a backlash where the younger generation enthusiastically votes for a neo-fascist party, AfD. And as mentioned earlier, all of Europe, including Spain, is struggling with the rise of extremism using hate as a weapon. This shows that no system can be a perfect shield. Political education is not a static system you can simply import and call it done. It is a fierce defensive war that must be constantly updated every single day, more persistently than the speed of algorithm propaganda. We shouldn't just worship a specific model. We must immediately build our own solid foundation. At the very least, we must restore the space for political language that was suppressed in the classroom, so children can build their own logical muscles to fight against the memes of hate. The alternative to extremism is proper political education, an everyday culture of debate, diverse model of masculinity free from gender stereotypes, and practical democratic spaces where youth can actively participate. Even if the process is slow and not immediately visible, it is the only and most certain approach confirmed by countless studies and educational fields so far. We cannot expect a future moving with the tolerance and solidarity from a generation that has not fiercely experienced the rules of democracy and the ethics of citizens in the classroom. The only permanent weapon to stand against capital and power that use hate as a resource is a solid political debate education that raises awakened citizens early on. The void left by an irresponsible state and political system was always filled by citizens. Already in 2022, Chairman Chung Yong-jin's "Destroy Communism" remarks caused an economic blow that wiped out 160 billion won in market cap. The contradiction of power holding hands with the Chinese capital like Alibaba has now been put on a fatal trial. Foreign media like the New York Times, BBC, and the Guardian broadcast Shinsegae Chairman Chung Yong-jin's connection with American Neo-Fascist political groups and Starbucks Korea's May 18th mocking marketing to the world. And he showed off his personal connections with American neo-fascist figures, including the Trump family on social media, trying to align himself with the global mega network. Ironically, his shallow bluff became a massive self-inflicted wound, putting himself on the harsh chopping block of the Western mainstream media that noticed that exact connection. Thanks to this, it was finally revealed to the world that Chung Yong-jin, the Ilbe bully, who couldn't even touch opponents of his own size or stronger, and Starbucks Korea had been freely mocking and inserting the weakest and most deeply wounded victims of Gwangju and the Seoul ferry disaster. And they were trapped in the simultaneous counterattack of the organized boycott by Korean citizens and the fierce anger of overseas citizens. Citizens are breaking through the critical point by connecting the scattered dots and fully decoding the deceitful speech of the neo-fascist groups. How can a state that failed to punish its own internal massacre like Cheondu-wan demand intense reflection from Japanese war criminals during the colonial period? Moral authority is only born through the painful process of fully facing and ruthlessly cleaning out one's own history. The frame of the Korean Neo-Fascist groups, which belittles the pride of democracy won by shedding blood and historical sacrifices, and praises the US and Japan, is a clever ideological disarmament tactic to break apart citizen solidarity and plant cynicism. But in the darkest moments of Korean history, the people who stood on the front lines of oppression and protected the real country were the ordinary, common sense citizens sharing rice bowls while breathing tear gas in the public square. Especially for overseas subscribers entering the tragedy of the May 18th Gwangju democratization movement and the torture and death of activist Park Jong-chul for the first time through this video, or wanting a deeper understanding, I want to recommend 3 visual works that powerfully capture the pain of that era. The movie 1987, depicting the passionate solidarity of people who held to their conscience, each from wherever they stood against the deceitful cover-up of power. The movie A Taxi Driver, capturing the true story of a blue-eyed witness and a taxi driver who first told the world about the tragedy of Gwangju, completely isolated by the military. And the drama Youth of May, sharply contrasting the cruelty of state violence through the micro everyday lives of ordinary youth in May 1980s, hidden behind a massive historical tragedy. These works put a human face on the lives that no extremist hate frame can erase, and convey the true weight of democracy built on bloodshed in the most visceral and powerful way. Think of my rotting side. Think of the bullet that pierced it. Think of the cold trigger. Think of the warm finger that pulled it. Think of the eyes of the person who ordered them to shoot. These anguished words, given voice by novelist Han Gang in Human Acts, testify how the state violence, so lightly mocked by power and capital, actually destroyed the body and soul of a real human being. The truth we must clearly face is not the manipulated tank images spread by the neo-fascist groups. It is the reality of the violence that pulled the trigger and the vivid, tragic sense of pain of those who fell to it. Chon Do-han, the very man responsible for the massacre, who was even sentenced to death for military rebellion and convicted of military insurrection, treason, and murder, was eventually given a special pardon under the deceitful excuse of national unity. This too was a decision made independently by the state, not the people. Until the last moment of his life, he didn't leave a single word of apology. He enjoyed a long life, accompanied by bodyguards, roaming golf courses, and famous restaurants, and died a natural death. Instead, he passed away distorting the truth of Gwangju through his memoirs, mocking and insulting the victims and grieving families to the very end. But karma definitely exists. Facing fierce opposition from the public, his ashes still haven't been buried anywhere and are currently kept in his house. Even in the tragedy of history that was never fully punished and the deceitful mocking of the attackers, the mothers of Gwangju, who endured over 40 years, embraced Chon Do-han's grandson, Chon Woo-won. He visited the May 18th National Cemetery in 2023, knelt down, and apologized with the tears. They held him and comforted his deep wounds. How scared and hard it must have been to come all the way here. You are like my own baby, my own child. That superhuman forgiveness, willingly giving a shoulder to the bloodline of the massacre, shows the most noble and wondrous trajectory a human can reach. The Mothers of May are infusing Korean society with profound sacrifice and courage, with the most overwhelming weapon of solidarity and embrace, not returning hate with hate, even through harsh years. But the great nobility of the victims must never become a free pass given to the attackers, or an alibi justifying our society's bystander attitude. Because Gwangju was alienated and isolated by state power for a long time, there might not be as many fancy massive shopping malls as in other regional cities. But if I have foreign friends visiting Korea, I would advise them to head to Gwangju without hesitation. There lies the former South Jeolla provincial office, which registered injustice riddled with hundreds of thousands of bullet holes and museums recording the noble footsteps of democratization. And food is amazing in Gwangju and Jeolla-Provence. There's Jeolla food, which boasts the deepest and richest flavors in Korea. And above all, the most righteous and warm people who do not yield to absurdity live there. Gwangju is no longer just a city of the past, trapped in the scars and pain. It shines brightly as the most holy and proud name that protected the heart of Korea's democracy. Ultimately, passing through the unprecedented tragic crisis of the Yoon Suk-yeol regime's illegal declaration of emergency martial law on December 3rd, we witnessed what a terrible monster the unpunished history of the past, which we failed to properly clean up, eventually returned as. Looking back, December 2024 was a time when citizens' historical awareness and sensitivity to state crimes were at their peak. The movie 12/12 The Day, dealing with the Chundu-wan's new military rebellion in 1979, leading to the May 18th Gwangju democratization movement in 1980, surpassed 10 million viewers. And writer Han Gang of Human Acts, who faced the scars of the May 18th Gwangju massacre, became the first Korean to win the Nobel Prize in Literature. When the public sensibility was at its peak, to the point where any sensible person in power couldn't even imagine an armed provocation. What on earth were they thinking to force such a reckless martial law declaration? I still don't understand. This clearly shows how totally the neo-fascist power trapped in anti-intellectualism and an isolated worldview is disconnected from the pulse of civil society. But behind the footsteps of citizens who ran to the National Assembly without taking a step back, even in front of the guns and swords of armed martial law troops, there were definitely the protection of the spirit of May 18th in Gwangju. The holy sacrifices of those who fell bleeding in completely isolated Gwangju 46 years ago finally crossed the time and protected South Korea in December 2024 from the ruthless military boots. Countless Korean believes that Gwangju in May 1980 protected Seoul in December 2024. The number of displaced refugees wandering the world stateless, losing their nationality and language is still increasing day by day. The ordinary daily life we enjoy, writing in our mother tongue and freely raising our voices, is not a right we were just handed for free. It is a dazzling miracle built firmly on the noble sacrifices, blood, and sweat of countless people who threw their whole bodies against oppression. Protecting the holy humanitarian legacy is entirely up to us who are alive and breathing right now. It's late, but this is the last chance. This is our calling as human beings. There's no time left to cover things up and move on with the proper compromises and artificial reconciliation. Right at this moment, the whole society must strictly draw a solid, permanent line declaring that we absolutely do not tolerate hate and violence. The persistent solidarity of ordinary people must forever break the chains of absurd establishments and finally open a dignified common sense world. Okay, how was it? This has been Hana's Island. Thank you for opening your heart to my story. I want to hear your thoughts too. You're safe here now. If you like my video, please support me with a like and subscribe. We will meet here again. Until then, stay comfortable on the island that perfectly fits your own latitude. Take care. Bye.